Hello and welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan M.S. Pearce. This is a news update for the Ukraine war for the 11th of February 2023. Let's get to where we usually start, which is the Ukrainian release figures for Russian losses from the day before. Usual caveats, because some people push back about this all the time. Yes, this is arguably propaganda. Yes, these are arguably inaccurate. I'm not looking at the figures per se. I'm looking at them as indicative values, giving me a sense of what happened the day before compared to the week before, the month before, so on and so forth. And Russia don't produce the same ones. Well, what we have here is a record loss for the Russians. And I think this probably, again, indicative. What does this indicate? It indicates that there was a lot of activity right across the front line, that Russia are pushing on a number of fronts, and this has necessarily caused an uptick in their losses. We know that Vuhledar and Avdiivka at the moment have been particularly painful for Russia. Bakhmut is a meat grinder, and it's not to say that there wasn't a day of record Ukrainian losses yesterday, of course. But nevertheless, there was a record day. It's a huge number of losses for Russian in terms of liquidated personnel, 1,140. A really big number. 9 tanks, 3 APCs. This is huge. 19 artillery systems. 19. That is massive. And in fact, like I've said before, this is a huge number, like a really important number. Although people do push back and say, well, actually, they have a huge number of pieces of artillery to sort of call on. But 19 bits of artillery taken out is significant, and I think that's really those kind of days like that will really dent Russia's ability to pound the Ukrainians. Now, for example, I know that 3 were taken out on the Dnipro River. Kherson keeps getting hit on a daily basis, and I wonder whether there's a concerted effort to hunt out those bits of artillery and take them out, because that will alleviate the pressure on some of these fronts. 1 anti-aircraft warfare system, 27 drones, 61 cruise missiles, and we'll see, obviously, that was because there was a saturation attack, or several saturation attacks yesterday, and we'll look into that in a bit more detail in a second. 8 vehicles and fuel tanks, 3 pieces of special equipment. They may be radar stations, could be bridge laying, so on and so forth. That's what you've got. Pretty significant numbers, fairly average on the APCs and whatnot. 9 tanks is pretty decent for the Ukrainians. Okay, well, looking at these numbers, where we've had over the last week, we've had 4 days of about 1,000, give or take. What evidence do we have that this is the case? Well, I have seen an absolute plethora of trenches being taken out, of lines of dead bodies and all sorts of stuff. So there's lots of evidence to suggest that there is a high death count going on, just from looking at social media. Then this came out actually a few days back, although it's been updated. I think this originally came out on the 5th. This occupiers have set up mobile crematoria in the Zaporizhia region. I don't know if crematoria is a plural of crematorium. This is an indicator, and we've heard this a number of times since the war began. In fact, very early on in the war, they were rolling these out. It indicates that high levels of loss, and with high levels of loss is this sense of like, well, how do we deal with the bodies? Like, do we have enough graveyards, or should we just cremate them? Okay, it's easier to cremate them. Then it also helps dealing with reporting that back to families and so on. It's much easier to say, oh, we don't know, your son has gone missing, your husband has gone missing in the war, we're not sure, could have deserted, MIA. So you say MIA, then you don't necessarily have to pay out as much money or whatever it is, and it's easier to deliver that kind of message to the general public, to members of the public, but and it's easy to cover up because you don't have a body. You've burnt the body. I don't know. Anyway, that is me speculating there. So yeah, take what I claim there with a good degree of skepticism. The drone attack last night appears to have done so. There was a further drone attack. So we had yesterday sort of morning. There was a saturation bombing attack, cruise missiles, drones, and then there was a further drone attack last night. apparently caused no damage, with all 20 suspected Iranian-made Shahed drones shot down by the Ukrainian air defense. But there are also claims that Shaheeds hit 2 energy facilities in Kryvyi Rih district and one in the Nikopol district. The head of Dnipropetrovsk Regional Military Administration said. Now, this could be from the previous wave that maybe some of the Shaheeds got through. I was under the impression that all the Shaheeds over the last 2 waves were shot down, but obviously that isn't the case. On February the 10th, says Michael McKay, the Russian fascist or the Russians made another massive missile attack on Ukraine, launching 106 missiles, including at civilian infrastructure. The enemy used 74 air and sea-based cruise missiles, 61 of which were destroyed by Ukrainian defenders. So 61 out of 74 in the end seems to be the latest, and I think I haven't got it, but there were. I'm sure I've got somewhere. Bear with me a second. That's me being thick. It's just below. Duh. During the attack, the enemy also used 32 S-300 anti-aircraft guided missiles. These are ones that are much more difficult to shoot down in their ground-to-ground mode. I'm fairly sure they're not guided in that mode. They're ballistic, and the Ukrainian air defenses don't particularly have the air defense systems to shoot these down, at least not as effectively. So 32 of them, I don't know how many of them got through. In addition, the Russians carried out 59 airstrikes, 28 of them using Shahed 136 drones. 22 drones were shot down. So here he's saying there were 6 drones that got through. The enemy made, so I think that was in the initial attack. And then in the attack last night, all 20 were shot down. The enemy, I've seen some footage of those Shaheeds getting taken out in the night last night. The enemy made more than 90 attacks from multiple launch rocket systems, so MLRS also playing their part. Here's one such example in Kherson, although you do have to wonder what the cost of a missile like this against the cost of a drone. But as I've said many times before, it's not the cost of the drone, but it's the damage, the potential damage that the drone can do. That's really what you should be, if you're going to make that calculation at all. And there you go. In the distance, Shahed is taken out by all accounts. Okay, so now let's think about those figures and think, if you're a Russian, how would you deal with the claims of these figures? Is it propaganda? Are these accurate, etc., etc.? And then you start piecing together, and I've been doing this the last few days, you start piecing together the evidence. So Oryx here, who is the most prominent of the open source intelligence sources, where in fact I think possibly one of the only ones that's doing it to this detail, counting up the losses, visually confirmed losses. And yesterday they totted up 34. Doesn't mean that was 34 lost yesterday, but they were calculating that yesterday. They get a whole shed load in, and they had to go through them, double, triple check them against all their other visual evidence to make sure they're not double counting, triple counting, so on and so forth. So it's quite a time consuming thing, and the longer the war goes on, the more time consuming that is, because you've got to check it against more evidence you've already compiled. So anyway, but yesterday, point being, 34 Russian losses, 5 Ukrainian losses. So that is 7-to-1 ratio of losses. That again is a data point to feed into what is the accuracy of these Ukrainian figures, and what are they compared to Russian losses. You can talk about selection bias. You can talk about whether the Russians are recording as much as the Ukrainians, whether there's that social media prevalence behind the Russian lines as there is behind the Ukrainian lines, and vice versa, so on and so forth. So there's lots to consider in that. But then you get footage like this, and there's a couple of reasons I want to show you. Not only to kind of provide evidence to support the claim of the figures from yesterday, but what's interesting here is that these things are parked up, and you get the initial hits on. There's a very accurate artillery. First of all, very accurate artillery. Second of all, so I don't know whether these are Excalibur rounds being used, or whether it's just really good artillery. But then you get this, whatever vehicle that is, some car by the looks of it, driving away, running away from here. But you don't see any of these vehicles running away. Are these parked up? Is there no one in them? do people just physically run away on foot as soon as this happens? Why aren't they sort of doing a UE, turning around and getting out of there? Because quite frankly, these are just now sitting ducks, and in fact, the artillery appears to just pick them off. Uh, I, I don't know whether more are picked off, but with each, yeah, there you go. There's another one, and with each of those kind of explosions, the one next to it will get shrapnel that will absolutely, cover that vehicle. But these guys are all parked up. You wonder where all the people are. There seem to be people running away. Just that vehicle that then is driving into the midst of it and then does a UE itself and gets out of there. But I always wonder why these vehicles don't just. If I was in one of those vehicles, I'd be like, start the engine, let's get out of here now. But maybe that's slower than literally just opening the hatch and running away. But I don't see anyone running away, so maybe all that stuff's parked up with no one in it. Today, so then you see footage of three self-propelled artillery systems being taken out on the Dnipro River using apparently Excalibur shells, and this then feeds into, what is it? How many? 19 artillery systems. I've actually seen quite a number of videos of artillery systems, being taken out. But anyway, there's just further evidence of more artillery systems sort of being totted up on those figures. Now, Philip O'Brien here is reporting on what the Pentagon has said. So the Pentagon is estimating that Russia has lost half of its entire tank stock. Russia's probably lost half of its main battle tank stock in combat and through Ukrainian capture, says Zelesnkyy, Assistant Secretary of Defense. Russia apparently have an absolute load of tanks, like 10,000 plus. And the talk at the beginning of the war is, my goodness, Russia have so many more tanks than Ukraine. But then we started seeing pictures of these Russian tank graveyards, if you like, in Russia, okay, where they're just being mothballed and left to rust and have been cannibalized. So then the theory is like, actually, they don't have that many tanks because those tanks are inoperable and they've been used to cannibalize. They've been taken apart for spare parts and used to support the tanks they do keep in operation. So actually looking at the headline Russian stats for tanks is entirely misleading. And then what we've seen throughout the war is they've tried to get some of those mothballed tanks to the front line by sending them back to the factory and getting them sort of repainted and upgraded. But with sanctions and whatnot, that's fairly difficult. The end result is Russia don't have nearly as many tanks as you think. I mean, by like a significant margin as you think they do, which is why we keep seeing T-62s as the ones being brought to the front line, from being mothballed. So then when you count up how many that they've lost in terms of what Oryx has added up, Pentagon's now estimated they've lost half of their tank stock, which is not only significant for this war, but just like with the cruise missiles, it's entirely significant in terms of what their capability is going forward. If they were to be engaged in another front line somewhere or another war somewhere, they just wouldn't be able to do it. They are committed to this war and this war only. And as I've said before, if Poland invaded Russia somehow, like, just as a theoretical, hypothetical, if Poland invaded Russia, I think Poland alone could defeat Russia now, given that Russia is committed to Ukraine. So this is a really significant figure, and well worth taking note of. British intelligence has explained why Wagner stopped recruiting prisoners in the war in Ukraine. So this is coming on the back of the announcement that Prigozhin has halted prisoner recruitment, according to himself. Data from the Russian Federal Penal Service has already suggested a drop-off in the rate of prisoner recruitment since December 2022. News of the harsh realities of the Wagner service in Ukraine has probably filtered through to inmates and reduced the number of volunteers. It's exactly what I said yesterday. However, a key factor of the termination of the scheme is likely increasingly direct rivalry between the Russian Ministry of Defense and Wagner. Exactly what I said yesterday. So I think British intelligence is watching my videos and just going, oh yeah, he knows what he's talking about. Obviously not. In addition, delusions of grandeur again. In addition, the regular Russian military has likely now also deployed the vast majority of the reservists called up under partial mobilization. The Russian leadership faces the difficult choice of either continuing to deplete its forces, scale back objectives, or conduct a further form of mobilization. Lots of talk about whether mobilization will be formally announced in the coming weeks. Uh, Here, talking about sort of mobilisation numbers of troops, this has been doing the rounds. British, they're not BMPs, they're IFVs. So British FV 103. Well, actually, no, they're probably APCs rather than IFVs. Anyway, British vehicles and all these troops, and loads of Ukrainians suggesting that this is an offensive building up in the Kharkiv district, in Luhansk or whatnot. This is highly unlikely to be a Ukrainian offensive. I don't want to be like overly skeptical here, but you're not going to see an accumulation of vehicles and troops in this way. Like, this is prime. Russia, do you want to hit us? Hit us now. And then people with their mobile phones taking this is almost certainly going to be training, I would have thought. I would be really surprised if this was an actual accumulation of troops ready for an offensive. It's just the operational security would be too poor, and it's just highly unlikely that they would allow people to be taking footage like that. So I think that is going to be training. Then there is reports, unconfirmed. I've not heard this anywhere else. This is coming from one of the sources I use, saying Russian troops have entered the eastern rural Kharkiv region from Russian territory on the west bank of the Oskil River. So this is to say, looking at my war map, if we go to the northeastern sector, to Kupiansk, Stantisvata, to Kremina, you've got the Oskil coming down here, north of Kupiansk, and comes in circles around here and ends up in the Liman area. Up here, they're saying that the Russian troops have come over the border on the west bank of the Oskil here. So you could have, that would make sense given that they are attacking. It seems that they've got quite a major attack going on up near Liman Pershi and Kupiansk, north of Kupiansk and Dvorichna. This would make perfect sense to have a flanking maneuver by the Russians further north that the Ukrainians have had to keep an eye on. So that wouldn't surprise me, but I have no other information about that. I will keep you updated. At night, the Russians are shelled, so the Russians have been shelling quite a bit. But interestingly, also places like Bohoyavlenka, which is behind Vuhledar, is starting to get grads attacking it. And in fact, there was talk about there being attacks towards there or around there. Not really quite sure exactly what the detail of that is. Defmon was talking about this the last 2 days. Like, what does that mean, and what are Russians doing anywhere near there? So to put that into context, I know I can't zoom in. I literally can't zoom in any further than this. So say you've got Vuhledar down here, or just along that front there. Well, that place is kind of back here, behind it. And if Vuhledar represents the front line, what are they doing, having troops anywhere near a town behind it? So is that accurate, or is it just artillery and grad shelling that's taking place? Anyway, Russia seem to be stepping up quite a lot of stuff at the moment, like artillery. You're getting your saturation missile attack and Shahed waves of Shahed drones, and you're getting offensives up and down the line. But then you also have this. So this is apparently a submersible drone that has gone and exploded under a bridge in Odessa. There's no verification as to whether the bridge supports have been damaged and whether this is superficial or not. I don't know. I guess this will come out today. But this is a significant change in tactics and what you would have expected the sort of Russia to be doing previously, but they just haven't done anything like this. The Ukrainians have been the ones doing stuff like this, and Russia, the second greatest army in the world, has just been sending troops into the front line or sending waves of cruise missiles, and that's it. I would have expected stuff like this from the Russians. Haven't seen it. So, however, that has happened, and if that hasn't caused significant damage, then that might be an opportunity missed for the Russians, because the Ukrainians will now be thinking, oh, okay, we now need to put nets in place. We now need to think very carefully about how we defend against stuff like this. And the end result is that the Ukrainians will be in a better position and the Russians will find it harder to do that. Think about the Kerch Bridge, but the Kerch Bridge was successful as an attack. So now the Russians will have loads of security around the Kerch Bridge to make it much harder for that to happen again. Yeah, but actually the damage was done and the Kerch Bridge was taken out. So that was entirely successful. Here, if that bridge hasn't been taken out in any significant way, then that's actually a kind of failed attempt. But I don't know. That's just me speculating. To add to that, they've attacked apparently with Su-24 bombers, bombing Snake Island. I don't know exactly what's on Snake Island at the moment, and I don't know what the damage that has been done is. But it's quite interesting that you're starting to get a number of different angles taking place, which is again this kind of combined arms activity that you would expect from a decent army. You're now starting to see Russia almost wake up after a year of war and go, oh, do you know what? Maybe we should do this. Maybe we should do that. You know what the Ukrainians have been doing? Yeah, should we do some of that? Yeah, let's do that. Let's take out this bridge. Let's bomb that island. Let's do this and let's do that. And it seems to be taking place. So that is fairly significant. On the flip side, the Melitopol has been hit 6 strong explosions. One would assume HIMARS attacks. Melitopol is down here in the southern Zaporizhia region, oblast. So there is activity, as always, from the Ukrainians. And remember, I told you about how the intelligence for that is coming from, or is certainly, confirmed by the Americans. Now, Zelenskyy has been in the UK and Europe over the last week. Sharp as a laser, Zelenskyy's address last night to his people following his visits to London, Paris and Brussels. After warm words towards Britain, he reports new support from Paris and Berlin of a nature not to be disclosed. That's fascinating. We've had so much telegraphing, signposting what aid is coming from both military, humanitarian and financial to Ukraine, which must serve a certain purpose. It must be communicating to Russia. It must be we are giving this, and the reason why we're putting this out in public is because we want Russia to know. But then there's aid that they don't want Russia to know, and in this case, it looks like that's what's taking place. So he thanks the people for their courage, so on and so forth. So I wonder what'll end up being on the front line coming from Europe that we weren't aware was happening. On that kind of front, Ukraine has submitted a formal request to the Netherlands to supply F-16s, confirmed by the defense minister for the Netherlands. There's been lots of talk about this, but an actual formal request makes that quite interesting. Scholz has come out, and this is significant. I hope by the end of March, Germany, and I don't know whether that is other nations that are supplying them to Rheinmetall to get upgraded, and then Germany supplies them, or whether this is Germany themselves on their own, unilaterally, will be able to hand over. So will be able to hand over. Anyway, Germany will be able to hand over 80 Leopard 2 tanks to Ukraine. Chancellor Olaf Scholz, after the EU summit in Brussels, has said, it won't be easy, but I hope we will succeed. That's big, right? 80 Leopard 2s is big. A batch of Lithuanians sent L-70 anti-air. I only talked about this yesterday, and they're already there. Often what happens, they get announced after they've already been sent. These L-70 anti-aircraft guns, they won't come with radars like the Gepard, but they'll have a similar kind of capability. So maybe, you're starting to see Shaheeds getting taken down much more consistently, although 6 did get through by the looks of it. This network of anti-aircraft capability is useful and will only improve, and they will help defend critical infrastructure. So these are sorts of things you can start putting well behind the lines, right? You're going to put your decent bits of kit, your Patriots and this sort of stuff around Kyiv. You're going to put NASAMs around certain areas, but some of these L-70s, right? We've got these other targets way in the west or whatnot. If we can place a whole bunch of these all around the country, this is going to be super useful. So yeah, a whole batch of them sent is great, even though they are kind of effectively low tech. Switzerland has rejected a request from Spain to allow it to re-export Swiss-made anti-aircraft guns to Ukraine. Bern has said on Friday, and I think that's not the only rejection they've done. I think there was another rejection they made as well to someone else. So Switzerland are still in that position, and it's part of their neutrality. Is not surprising. But it's just, further examples that will cause tension within Swiss politics and amongst the Swiss public between those who want to aid Ukraine and bypass these neutrality laws, and those who feel very strongly that Switzerland needs to remain neutral, even though I've said before, it doesn't make sense given you've got uh, a military export industry. It doesn't make sense economically for that industry, and it also morally is really weird the way that works. Anyway, I won't go on about that. Last thing, since the initial, a couple of interesting graphs here. Since the initial reaction to the invasion in February 2022, the number of companies totally out of Russia has not increased much. So you see that after the initial invasion in February, and then there was a massive drop to March, and then not a lot after that. So the companies that are still in Ukraine have remained pretty much the same in terms of numbers. And if you look at it like this, you've got not very many out compared to those that are still basically in. Now, the thing about free market economics, and I don't want to have this is just a very short point, is it can't arbitrate from morality. So unless you regulate, unless you say you are not allowed to be in there, right? In which case, it's a very clear rule. That's why governments regulate. People have a go at regulation, but literally, if you want children working down mines, that's fine. But if you don't want children working down mines, you need to regulate. So regulation is absolutely vital because a free market can't arbitrate for morality. It has no way of it's just doing what people want. When people want to make money, then you can employ people and you can kill them. You can use them as slaves, right? And if they work and then die, that's not a problem. It's only a problem if that has an economic impact on your business model, right? So free market economics can't arbitrate for morality. How you get morality into that is regulation, or you just need everyone working in those companies, in the CEOs at the top of those companies, to have a moral backbone that is greater than their desire for profit. But if your desire for profit is stronger than your desire to show moral strength, then you will make decisions that will favor making profit. In this case, you've got companies that are staying in Russia because either they are pro-Russian for some weird reason, or they want to make money. So the only way to change this, really, human beings are not good at changing behavior based on morality, really. Like changing behavior. Like what changes behavior, sadly enough, is things like regulation. And that annoys free marketeers, but that's literally the reality. We know this from the psychology of economics and political psychology, moral psychology. That we know this. That's a sad reality there. So if we're going to not regulate companies being in Russia, then you're going to have to rely on them changing their behavior from pressure from the public, things like Twitter accounts hassling these companies, saying you need to pull out, hope not hate type things, or it's in their best business interest to do so for some other reason. Anyway, that's that. That's the news segment today. Before I go off on one about economics again, let me know what you think. If you disagree, please disagree. Bring the receipts, and I love a good disagreement. Someone yesterday said, "I don't think you're right on the claiming this is a proxy war, so I've unsubbed you." Like, okay, that's pretty sensitive. You need to just try and convince me. Don't just give up and say I'm not following you. If you like the rest of the stuff I do, we can disagree on certain things, but let's have an argument about that. Let's debate that in good faith. Anyway, there you go. You're free to unsub if you want, of course. Anyway, thanks for your support. You're also free to like, subscribe, and share. So please do so if you can. I will hopefully get back to you. It's Saturday. It's a bit funky today. With a frontline update soon.